Hello everybody, it is I, Siberian, once again welcoming you aboard the Hype Train. Yesterday we talked about designing and organizing ground units and formations. Today we're going to talk about probably one of the bigger elements within ground forces itself and that changes exactly how combat plays out, specifically logistics. So, ground forces have two separate logistics requirements. The first is maintenance, which applies to all units at all times and has a wealth cost of 12.5% of ground unit cost per annum. The second is ground supply points, GSP, which applies only to combat units during combat. The GSP requirement for a weapon component is equal to penetration value times damage value times shots. For example, personal weapons is 1 times 1 times 1, which is 1. Crew-served anti-personnel is 1 times 1 times 6, or 6. Medium anti-vehicle is 4 by 6 by 1, or 24. And heavy bombardment is 2 by 6 by 3, or 36. The GSP requirement for a ground unit class is the sum of its weapon components. For example, a tank with a medium anti-vehicle component and a crew-served anti-personnel component would have a GSP requirement of 30. The GSP requirement for a formation element is the GSP for the ground unit class and the element multiplied by the number of units. The GSP requirement for a formation is the sum of the GSP of its constituent formation elements. In all these cases, that is the GSP cost to provide sufficient supply for 10 combat rounds. Two new ground unit components have been added. The logistics module, which is size 50 and provides 500 GSP, and the logistics module small, which is size 10 and provides 100 GSP. The standard module is available for light vehicle and infantry base types, and while the small module is only available to infantry. Here is an example of a light vehicle with the logistics module. Ground units with either logistics module can be added to any level of the ground force hierarchy, either embedded with the frontline combat formations or held at a superior formation, such as the headquarters. Each ground unit has sufficient inherent supply points to fight 10 rounds of combat. Currently, 1 round takes place every 8 hours. After that point, only 1/4 of units in a formation element that is out of supply will fire in each round. In addition, a formation with out of supply elements cannot use a field position of frontline attack. More on this later. However, if units with the logistics modules are available, ground units can draw supply to both fight the current combat round and replenish supplies used in previous combat rounds. Ground units will attempt to draw supply from the formation that sits highest in their hierarchy and is at the same population. If no supply is available, they will move down the hierarchy to their own parent formation, checking at each stage. However, when drawing supply from outside their own formation, units can only draw on logistics modules mounted on light vehicles. Logistics modules with an infantry base type can only supply their own formation. For example, a formation element of 10 ranks engaged in combat is part of an armored formation with a brigade HQ formation above it and a division HQ formation above that. The tanks will check for a vehicle-based logistics element within the division formation first, then a vehicle-based logistics element within the brigade formation, and finally either type of logistics element within their own parent formation. If no logistics elements are available, the tanks will use their inherent supply, although they can only use an inherent supply for 10 combat rounds unless resupplied. If a unit does not require a full resupply, for example if it still has sufficient inherent supply for 8 combat rounds, it will only draw an appropriate fraction of its normal GSP requirement, in this case 20%. When a formation element of logistics units provides supply, a number of units will be consumed based on the supply required. For example, assuming that 10 tanks above each have a GSP requirement of 100, which is 1000 for the whole element. If they draw on a logistics element using light vehicles with normal logistics modules, which have 500 GSP each, 2 of those logistics vehicles will be consumed. When the GSP requirement does not neatly fit into the 500 point granularity, there is a chance of an additional logistics vehicle being consumed. This chance is dependent on the fraction of supplies required. For example, if there were 12 tanks with a requirement of 1200, then 2 logistics vehicles will be consumed and there is a 40% chance that a third vehicle will be consumed. This adds an element of uncertainty, as supplies may be consumed faster or slower than normal, although it will average out over time, plus it avoids any tracking of partial supplies as per vehicle. Here is an example of a formation template for the brigade headquarters that includes 50 supply vehicles. Here is an order of battle for a divisional formation. At the divisional level are 240 supply vehicles, indicated by log 120k, in the formation attributes column. with smaller numbers within each brigade headquarters formation. The GSB column shows the resupply requirement for each formation or formation element. The total divisional organization requires 40,338 GSP for a complete resupply, and there are sufficient supply vehicles, 410, in that organization to resupply 5 times. With the inherent supply as well, the entire division can stay in combat for 60 rounds before additional supply vehicles are required. Finally, here is a view of a single population with the order of battle tab in location mode. While we're on screenshots, here is a screenshot of the UI for setting support relationships between superior and subordinate formations. You drag the superior formation onto the subordinate formation. If the support checkbox is checked, the supporting formation is shown in blue-gray with the name of the supported formation. Any supported formation is shown in orange. Support can only be provided when the supporting formation is a superior formation in the hierarchy of the supported formation, or is directly subordinate to the superior formation in the hierarchy of the supported formation and does not itself have any subordinate formations. So, an independent artillery formation, for example. Supporting formations must be on the same system body as the supported formation. In combat, the support relationship will only function if the supporting unit has suitable bombardment units and is in a support or rear echelon position, and the supported unit is in the frontline position. So essentially, the supporting unit supports frontline positions with artillery. The drag drop is intelligent and can distinguish between setting support relationships, reassigning formations to a new headquarters, removing headquarters assignments, moving formations from one population to another on the same system body, and moving elements between formations. Here is the same screenshot as the previous, but with the elements option selected. Now the formation elements for each ground formation are shown in the hierarchy. For formations with no subordinate formations, the formation elements are shown directly under the parent formation. For formations with subordinate formations, the formation elements are shown under their own node to avoid cluttering the tree view. To move elements between formations, you can drag and drop elements from one formation to another, although they must be on the same system body. Now, normally, the whole element is transferred. However, if the amount checkbox is checked, a pop-up box will appear after the drag drop, allowing you to transfer only a portion of the element. If the receiving formation already has an element with the same ground unit class, the additional units will be added to the existing element. Now, we touched on fortification earlier. Let's talk about it in more detail. Fortification happens at the element level. Formation elements can fortify to different levels, depending on the base type of the unit class. That level is also affected by whether the element is restricted to fortifying itself or if it has assistance from construction vehicles. The level of self-fortification and maximum fortification is as follows. Infantry and static can do 3 and 6. Light vehicle, medium vehicle, and heavy vehicles can do 2 and 3. Super heavy can do 1.5 and 2. And ultra heavy vehicle can do 1.25 and 1.5. So vehicles, the bigger they are, seem to be much more difficult to fortify and to a much lower level, which is reasonable and balanced considering they have innately more armor than just infantry. It's also a lot easier to hide a couple hundred people than it is to hide a 2, 3, 5, 800 ton tank. All elements move from non-fortified to their maximum self-fortification level in 30 days without outside assistance. This progress is linear and happens automatically for all formation elements when their parent formation is not set to frontline attack. Construction elements will work on any element in their own formation or that formation's subordinate hierarchy that has already reached its max self-fortification level. If the construction element's formation has no subordinate, the construction elements will work on any element in their own formation's parent formation or in that parent formation's subordinate hierarchy that has already reached its max self-fortification level. This means you can attach a construction-based formation directly to a formation you need fortified, or you can attach to a HQ and it will fortify every formation descending from that HQ. Construction elements can only assist elements that are on the same system body. Given sufficient capacity, a construction element can fortify any other element from its maximum self-fortification level to the maximum fortification level in 90 days. The capacity of a construction element is equal to the construction rating of the element's unit class times the number of units times race construction rating times commander production bonus times 100 tons. For example, a formation of 50 construction vehicles, each with 0.1 construction rating, or 2 construction components at 0.05, For a race with 16 construction, which is part of a formation with commander with 10% production bonus, would be 0.1 times 50 times 16 times 1.1 times 100, or 8,800 tons. By the way, a construction battalion of this type would cost 636 BP to build. Numbers, of course, always subject to change. All construction elements are ordered by descending order of construction capacity. Each one determines the list of elements that they can assist using the above criteria, excluding any that have been assisted by previous construction element. The list of target element is ordered by the construction rating, so construction units fortify themselves last. Then descending tracking speed, so point defense STO and then normal STO. Then by field position, so frontline defense, then support, then rear echelon. Then by descending max fortification, so infantry static first. Then by descending cost, elements with more expensive units first. Then by descending morale. The construction element cycles through the list of target elements using the following process. The total size of the target element is determined. This is compared to the remaining construction capacity of the construction element. If it is greater, then the remaining construction capacity of the construction element is reduced by the size of the target element. If it is less, the remaining construction capacity is reduced to 0, and a size versus capacity modifier equal to the remaining construction divided by target element size is applied below. The amount of fortification that could be accomplished in 90 days is determined by deducting the target element's self-fortification level from the target element max fortification level. The amount of fortification that can be accomplished within the current period is determined by 90-day fortification amount times current period divided by 90 days times size versus capacity modifier. The fortification for the current period is applied. If this would surpass the target element max fortification, then that value is set instead. If the construction element has capacity remaining, it moves on to the next target element in its list. Note that because of the way this is applied, it will take the same amount of time to move infantry from fortification level 3 to level 6 as it does for armor from level 2 to 3. This process will allow the player to either directly manage construction elements by attaching their formation to the desired target formation, or to attach the formation to a high level HQ and have the process happen automatically. So you can micro as much as you want. If a construction element is used to fortify other elements, it will not contribute its construction capacity to its parent population during the next construction phase. In combat, if the fortification level of a formation element is greater than 1, it's multiplied by the fortification bonus of the dominant terrain. Now, this is interesting, but it also makes sense in that if you have a very high fortification terrain, having a formation that is less than 1 does not give you bonuses. So, if you have 0.5 fortification and that's all you've been able to gather together on a very heavy mountainous world with a huge fortification bonus, you're still only going to get a 0.5 fortification level. So something to keep in mind for when you're rushing your defenses. And last thing for today, we're going to talk about collateral damage, that fun little side effect of war. When ground combat takes place, it may cause collateral damage to the population involved. This is based on attacks rather than hits. For example, if you use heavy bombardment weapons, it will have an impact on the population regardless of whether you hit any hostile units. Collateral damage is caused by any weapon that affects ground combat, including close air support and orbital bombardment support, something we're going to talk about tomorrow. Collateral damage is not linear with ground combat damage. And the effect of the population increases exponentially for ground or combat weapons with higher damage. The base component damage value of each weapon that fires is cubed, then the total damage is divided by 10,000. For example, an infantryman with personal weapons would generate 0.0001 collateral damage per combat round. Damage 1, shots 1. Light anti-vehicle, damage 2, shots 2 is 0.008. Or more than 8 times. It's like 80 times. Light bombardment, damage 2, shots 3 is 0.0024. Medium anti-vehicle, damage 4, shots 1 is 0.064. And you can read the rest. Putting that in terms of regiments, 1,000 infantrymen would generate 0.1 collateral damage per combat round, while 50 heavy tanks, about the same size but twice the cost, would generate 1.2 collateral damage. Assuming heavy armored vehicle and HCAP, over 10 combat rounds, that will become 1 and 11.2 respectively. To put that in perspective, versus energy weapon fire, a construction factory has 20 hit points and a research facility has 400 hit points. Once the total damage to a population is calculated, it is allocated as a series of 2-point energy weapon attacks. This is because infrastructure has 2 hit points. A construction factory, 20 hit points, would have a 10% chance of being destroyed, etc. In addition to the installation damage, the collateral energy damage increases the dust level by 5% of the damage amount and inflicts civilian casualties at a rate of 2,000 per point of damage. As populations suffer collateral damage, a track is kept of the total size of destroyed installations. Future collateral damage is reduced by total size of intact installations divided by total size of intact and destroyed installations. This is to simulate that fighting in the rubble does not cause further collateral damage. As ground support fighters are involved in close combat, fighter pods have a base damage equal to their normal damage divided by the weapon tech at the time of creation, which is used for base component damage value in the above collateral damage calculation. This brings them in line with ground forces. Orbital bombardment support is less discriminatory, and the base value does not change over time. For example, a higher tech tank will inflict more damage, but a 10cm laser is always a 10cm laser. Therefore, orbital bombardment support uses 20% of the normal damage versus ground forces as the base component damage value. Consequently, orbital bombardment will generally cause much more collateral damage than an equivalent amount of damage from ground-based weapons or ground support fighters. If attacking forces wish to minimize collateral damage, they will need to restrict the use of heavy weapons and orbital bombardment support. Note that the base component damage value is used on the assumption that higher tech ground units are more destructive, but also more precise in their targeting. And with that, and those few little sneak peeks for you for tomorrow's episode, that is it for today. Join me tomorrow where we will start finally talking about ground support and aerospace. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. Down below in the comments, links to the official Aurora Discord, Reddit, and the forums where you can join the hype. And I will see you next time.